Hi, my name is Tara Watson. I'm a professor here at Williams College and the faculty director of the Williams Poverty Initiative, which is an entity on campus that tries to connect academic learning to actual real-world learning about poverty. On behalf of the entire college, I'd like to welcome you to campus and welcome you to this wonderful event. I'd like to take an opportunity to thank BCAC for putting this together along with many partners, and also to thank the Center for Learning and Action for putting this, doing the legwork to make this happen. Recently I was watching It's a Wonderful Life. I don't know if you guys know that movie. Probably you do. It's about a man, George Bailey. He's feeling very despondent about his life, and an angel comes down to show him what his community would be like if not for the efforts that he had put in. And through that, he recognizes how important his work is. And so I'd like each of us to just take a moment to think about how we touch the lives of people in our community every day, and collectively, what everyone in this room does together makes such a big difference in our community. So even though we see so much need out there, we feel like times are tough, it's important to take a step back and realize our efforts really do make a difference, and it's great that we can all gather here today to think about ways we can improve those efforts and move the conversation forward. So on that note, I'd like to welcome Joe Diamond and Deb Leonczyk to the stage to share their remarks. Thank you.
Good morning. Can you all hear me? There's a friend of mine who used to work for the governor, and so every time he would present at an event that was in the morning, he would say, "Good morning," and he would wait. Good morning. Great. That was great. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Tara, for the introduction. I'm Joe Diamond from MASSCAP, which is the Association of all the Community Action Agencies in Massachusetts. And we are so pleased to be able to be a co-sponsor of this event today and partner with BCAC, with Deb Leonczyk, and with her entire team to bring information to you today and have this conversation about poverty in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is, as we're all very proud of, a very advanced state when it comes to caring for each other. Yet, because of a lot of factors, it still is a state that suffers from inequality. There is a lot that we've done, and there's been much that we've been successful at doing in terms of helping each other. This report will show that. But at the same time, there's a lot more that we can do. There's more that we can learn, and we need to update our understanding on poverty and inequality and how to address it and how to make the economy work for everyone. So we thought it was incumbent on MASSCAP to continue to work with MassBudget. And we've been working with MassBudget for over 15 years now on these reports to update the previous report that was done in 2014. And because of our central role in fighting poverty, mandated by the federal government to do so across the state, helping about 600,000 people in virtually every city and town, that we thought it was incumbent on us to bring this information to folks, to talk about what works, but to talk about what more, as Tara was alluding to, what more we can do. It's really critical to have this conversation and continue it. This is the 6th in a series, the last in a series of forums that are focused on the findings of this report. And each conversation we've had, Boston, Quincy, Lawrence, Worcester, Springfield, here, each of those conversations have been unique in many ways. We've been finding out what the unique needs are in those communities and also what the solutions are. We want to be able to foster these conversations. You'll hear some today. We're going to collect all of that and report on it as well and act on it too. So it's our pleasure to be here. We're really thrilled to be way out west. My colleague Lisa Clay, who's here, who runs communications for MassCap. Lisa, if you could raise your hand. She and I drove out in different cars last night, different routes to get here. And it was a little bit of an adventure for me, getting on Route 2, getting over the hill. There was a little bit of snow. But I'm really glad and happy that I did. I wanted now to introduce Deb Leonczyk, who is the executive director of BCAC. This might embarrass Deb a little bit, but you guys are really, really fortunate to have Deb. She is not only a charismatic leader, as you all know. But she brings with her such a deep understanding of how to run a community-based organization from a variety of perspectives, including the fiscal side. So we in the network feel fortunate to have her here, and I know she feels the same way about you all. So, Deb, please join us.
Good morning and welcome to our forum. Before I begin my introductions of the panel, I'd like to publicly thank Paula Consolini of Williams College for all of her assistance in planning and underwriting this event. For all of you who know her, she's a real force of nature. Her compassion, commitment, and unending energy has changed the face of Northern Berkshire County through her leadership of the Center for Learning and Action here at Williams. Paula, thank you. Come up. Come up.
That's a waste of time, isn't it?
No. I don't think so, Paula. Okay, we're hoping that the forum here creates meaningful dialogue that'll lead to collaborative action around the destabilizing effects of poverty in our county. We'll hear from our state delegation on the work being done at the State House to help bring prosperity to the county, and from our local leaders, our new DA and our mayors, on the measures being taken to address these issues locally. As important as these leaders are to this discussion, your participation is equally valuable. We want to hear of the initiatives that are being undertaken at the grassroots level and from the agency spearheading the efforts to address these problems. We want this to be a comprehensive sharing of information from all sectors, not just of the actions that are being performed, but also of your ideas and suggestions. So speak up when given the opportunity. Share your work and ideas with the community present here today. We hope that you walk away with a better understanding of poverty and the work being done on all fronts to combat it. So I'm going to take a few minutes to introduce our presenters. Nancy Wagman, who is from the Center for Policy and Budget, who will be presenting the poverty report. Stand up, Nancy. Our delegation, Senator Adam Hinds. Okay. Representative Tricia Farley-Bouvier. Representative John Barrett. Our local leaders, Mayor Tom Bernard of North Adams, Mayor Linda Tyre of Pittsfield, and I don't see, is Paul Mark in the room yet? He'll be here. And also Andrea Harrington, our new DA, she'll get here. Okay, I have every confidence. And Alyssa Costa from the Pittsfield Working Cities Initiative. I'd also like to introduce three people. The two deputy directors at BCAC, without whom we couldn't have pulled this off. So Brian House, our deputy director. You should be up here. And Alita Monchecki. And I'd also like to introduce our board chair, Jeff Lowenstein. He will be acting as moderator and timekeeper, and he does that very well and very respectfully. So I'm going to turn it over to Nancy.
There we go.
So can you see that? Because I'm going to be putting pictures up there. Jeff, I have my own stopwatch here, but keep me on time. And I'm going to be talking fairly quickly because I'm going to be talking about 50 years. So I'm going to get going. Basically, we're talking about obstacles on the road to opportunity in our communities. I'm going to give you some history and context. We'll talk about policies and their impacts. We'll share some ideas about what work in removing obstacles to opportunity. And then we'll talk a little bit about some emerging roadblocks and new challenges. So what do we mean when we're talking about a promise of opportunity? Well, you know what? I think we all know what we mean. It was written on the mission statement out there when you first came in. It's that every child, regardless of race, ethnicity, zip code, gender, has access to the best possible life, their best, brightest future, great schools, safe communities, affordable housing, a good paying job. That's how we create our best Commonwealth. So I'm going to start with a picture. We're going to start with what's called the post-World War II boom. I'm going to be drawing you a picture. This picture is in the form of a graph. And on the bottom you see dates, 1948 to 1973. Going up is growth. So if something has grown by 100%, it means it's doubled. And Professor Watson is familiar with this. This is productivity. Productivity is technically, it's net productivity, output per worker hour, but let's basically say this is a picture of the growth of the economy during the post-World War II period. What do you see? It's growing, right? It's about doubling in size. Here's another line. This is compensation. It's wages and benefits for non-supervisory workers, but basically this is what goes into people's pockets, okay? Productivity is growing, the economy is growing, and wages growing right along with it. So these lines are very tightly aligned. I think that's what's so interesting about this post-World War II period. So this is a picture of post-World War II America. I'm going to show you another set of slides. This is, if you lined everybody up this is the US, you lined everybody up by their household income and you broke them into groups. This is what was happening during this period with folks whose incomes were at the lowest level, at the bottom. Their incomes were growing at about this same rate. There were wiggles up and down, but their incomes were growing. Incomes in the middle, growing at the same rate. Incomes for those at the top, also growing at about the same rate. I think what's very interesting about this picture of post-World War II America is that the economy's growing, everybody's income is growing about the same way. I'm going to show you another picture of post-World War II America, and it's this. This is an ad from the Ford Motor Company, 1950, and what it says is, now thousands own 2 fine cars. And what I love about this is because this, to me, is a picture of this idea of a growing standard of living. The idea is people used to maybe be able to have 1 car, now they have 2. Now they can afford 2. So that's another picture of the post-World War II economic boom. So there's a promise of prosperity for anyone with access, with anyone with a good job, but there were barriers that kept prosperity from some. Okay, there were policies that kept this opportunity from some communities. This is a picture of Boston. This is a picture of Albany. This is a picture of Chicopee, and what these are is this a little earlier, the Homeowners Loan Corporation in the 1930s, early 40s, federal organization. This is a federal organization sent bankers and mortgage brokers out into their communities and said, describe your community, describe these communities for me, and let's draw maps. And they color-coded the maps. There were blue communities that were really good, and green ones, yellow ones that were kind of risky. And then there were communities that were colored red. They were outlined in red. That's where you might have heard the term redlining. That's where that comes from. This is a federal organization that sort of set this up. And what the Homeowners Loan Corporation had these folks do is write reports describing these communities that had been color-coded Here's an excerpt from one of these reports, and very explicitly, communities that were outlined in red, where the banks were instructed, don't sell mortgages in these communities. These are hazardous communities for doing business loans. In other words, we are saying to you, we want to limit opportunity for folks in these communities. It was very explicitly communities that had poor people living in them, immigrants, people of color, very, very explicitly. So my point being, these were decisions made by policymakers and regulators at that time that affected access to opportunity in those communities. I don't have time to go into this. This is a great book if you're interested in this issue, The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, that lists some of the other kinds of policies. I want to be very clear. Policies matter. These were policies that affected access to opportunities in some communities. So this is post-World War II America. We have a booming economy, wage growth for some, and barriers to opportunity for some as well. So these two things are happening simultaneously. So that leads us into the 50s. We have the Civil Rights Movement. And then in 1964, Lyndon Johnson becomes president. And in his State of the Union address, he says he wants to declare a war on poverty. And what are the weapons he's going to use in this war? The weapons are better schools, health care, safe and affordable homes, training, jobs. These are the weapons in the declared war on poverty. These are, I'm not going to read this list. It's a long and overwhelmingly impressive list of legislation that was passed during this period. But if you scan down this, you can see that this was an attempt to use policy levers to address the barriers that had been erected or barriers that had been allowed to remain that limited access to opportunity in rural communities. There are particular concerns about rural poverty. You know, you live in a rural area out here, and in the cities as well. I'm just going to highlight in 1964 the Economic Opportunity Act. And on signing the act, the president said, "Today, for the first time in all the history of the human race, a great nation is able to make and is willing to make a commitment to eradicate poverty among its people." And how did they do that? One of the ways you know very well. This is the network of the community action agencies that was created with the signing of the Economic Opportunity Act in the 60s. So there you are out in the corner. This is part of what this war on poverty was all about. So did it work? Okay, well, let's take a look. We have data from the US Census, United States and Massachusetts. This is sort of poverty rates during this period, 1960 poverty rates, 1970. You can see poverty cutting about a third, okay? Looks like this is kind of good. Maybe this war on poverty is really working. So I'm going to give you some more data. This now is child poverty, and I will tell you we didn't even measure child poverty before the war on poverty, so we don't have Massachusetts numbers for that. But what you can see is, okay, poverty drops, but then what do you notice? It's kind of stuck, right? It's not continuing to drop. So what's going on? Is it that, did this war on poverty not really work? What's happening? Well, what's particularly interesting is that the Census Bureau a couple of years ago developed an alternative way of looking at poverty, different from the official poverty measure. It's called the Supplemental Poverty Measure. And the way that that alternative measure is created is it actually allows you to identify the impact of safety net programs on poverty. You can actually measure it now. And what this shows you, these are Massachusetts numbers that SNAP or food stamps, housing assistance, and the other safety net programs, in fact, in Massachusetts, have cut poverty in half, okay? 920,000 people kept out of poverty thanks to these programs. Think about George Bailey. If he hadn't lived, 920,000 people more in Massachusetts would be in poverty were it not for these programs. And the numbers, these are the numbers for kids in Massachusetts. 200,000 kids in Massachusetts kept out of poverty, thanks to the work you all do in your communities. So we know, okay, we know that the safety net programs are not the issue. So what's going on? Let's look a little more at policy. So we've seen these lines before, productivity, compensation. Now we're going to look at these numbers going into today, okay? Here's the economy. Fine, it's continuing to grow, right? Let's look at what's happened to compensation. So during this same period, the economy is growing, but compensation, what's going into workers' pockets, has flattened. And we can see this in income. This is incomes at the 20th percent. This is just from 1980 to the present. Incomes, this is Massachusetts numbers. Incomes at the bottom, incomes at the middle are flat. But wait a minute. This doesn't make sense because we see the economy is growing. Where is the economic benefit of all of that productivity going? It's not going into the pockets of people at the bottom or in the middle. Well, this is what's happened to incomes at the top 1%. And what we see is that there were policies in that we're at that break in the sort of period of the 70s. There were policies. The federal government allowed the minimum wage, the value of the minimum wage, to falter. There were protections for unions and unionized workers were diminished. There were macroeconomic policies that emphasized emphasized inflation rather than employment. There were various policy decisions made in that period, and this is the impact of those policies. So let's just look at it very quickly. This is the new Massachusetts minimum wage, just as of January 1st, $12 full-time work at the Mass minimum wage. These are the official poverty levels. Point is, full-time work, people are working. Even you can be working full-time, working really hard, and still be poor, okay? And the point, you don't have to look at all these numbers, just look at that 61%. That I want to make the connection between low-wage work and poverty. I think most of you who work in the community know that most people who are poor are working. They're just not earning enough.
Are these slides available?
Yes, I believe they will be.
And we also have full reports, copies of full reports downstairs. And if you need one, just contact me and I'll get you one.
So many of these, some of these slides are actually updated, more recent numbers than the one that's in the published report, because I wrote that back in May, and the Census Bureau keeps updating their numbers. But the story is all there and in that report. So this is low wage growth and other policies, barriers to opportunity have created variations, disparities in income across the state. We talked about when people don't have access to opportunity in their communities, they don't have access to good jobs. And I want to show you this map, just so you can see. We said that the median state income, families with kids, is about $96,000. But in our communities up here, you can see it's about half that. So there's enormous disparities across the Commonwealth as well. And so it's really important when you look at statewide numbers, I think, to just always dig a little deeper. By the way, these data are on the Kids Count Data Center. You can get all of these numbers in the map as well. There's also wide disparities in wealth. A study from the Federal Reserve Bank in Boston a couple of years ago. Where do most people get their wealth? From their house. And if your family has been denied access to a mortgage, it's harder for you to have access to a house. And people, wealth gets transferred from generation to generation. So there are generational impacts of barriers to opportunity. So I think the disparities in wealth, about $250,000 for a white household, $8 for a black household, are really significant. And disparities in income, disparities in wealth lead to poverty. And for all kids in Massachusetts, it's about 14%, but you can see for Latinx kids, about 1 in 3 Latinx kids in Massachusetts are poor. Oops, wrong way. And even for near poor, it's not just, 200% of the poverty level, that's about an income about $48,000. That's tough to get by. About half of the kids in Pittsfield are near poor. So 1 in 4, when you don't have enough money, it's hard to afford rent. 1 in 4 households pay half their income on rent. These are the numbers here for our communities. There's a range just because the sample sizes are small, but it could be as many as 3 out of 10 in North Adams are paying half their income on rent. And housing costs alone don't tell the whole story of affordability. This is a map I just want to show you. This shows affordable housing is green, but this is what happens when you add in the cost of transportation. All of a sudden, communities do not become so affordable. So what works? Well, we know that well-resourced communities help lower barriers to opportunity. Things such as investing in lowering the high cost of housing, education, from early education through affordable higher education. Investments that can help low-income families make ends meet, keep warm when it's weather like this outside, putting food on the table, having enough to get by. And I want to reiterate that policies matter, and policies can, and that's good news because we can change policy. Right? If we need to do something to change policy, we can do it. We have our elected officials right here. They know that. That's their work. So this is a Boston picture, people organizing to increase the minimum wage, which will benefit more than 20% of our kids in Massachusetts. Doubling the earned income tax credit, which benefits in North Adams about 1 in every 5 taxpayer benefits from the earned income tax credit. Balancing the needs of working families, earned paid sick time, paid family medical leave. These are recent victories, so victories can be done. But they're still ahead. There are still challenges, affordable child care, access to transportation so people can get to good jobs. And we know that there are obstacles. Sometimes the bridge doesn't stretch quite far enough. There are great programs, but they may be underfunded. Their funding might not keep up with inflation. There may be waiting lists, particularly Section 8 housing, childcare are 2 really strong examples of that. And there are potholes. You'll hear about the cliff effects, we call them potholes. They're sort of bumps in the road to opportunity as benefits phase out as your income goes up. And I want to end with some emerging roadblocks, new challenges. First of all, I do want to mention the census. I'm really passionate about the census. The federal census in 2020 will directly affect funding for each of these programs that's listed up here. And if we don't count every single person, every single kid, everybody, our communities will not get their fair share of their resources. The picture there is you know when the first census was? 1790. That's the 1790 census from Berkshire County, right there. Again, federal policies have significant impacts on our families and communities. Recent federal tax legislation pulled $1.5 trillion out of the federal budget, okay? And that puts the state budget in jeopardy because 1 out of every $4 in our state budget actually comes from the federal government. So when there are federal budget cuts, it can have an impact right here in Massachusetts. You may have heard a little bit about changes in immigration policy and concerns about redefining what public charge means. I'm not going to go into it here. You can look on our website, but that can have an impact on people who are eligible for programs being concerned about getting access to them. And the 2020 census has a big issue with whether there's going to be a citizenship question on it, and there's also the shutdown. Okay, so we don't know yet what the impact of that will be. But I will say I saw yesterday that for those of you who are concerned about clients who receive SNAP, I believe SNAP, they're trying to front load SNAP money so that there will be SNAP. People will get their SNAP benefits in February, but we don't know what will happen after that. So finally, the takeaways. Again, policies can have long-lasting impacts. Poverty is an outcome of low-wage work, under-resourced communities, and we can pass policies that improve work and that invest in our communities, and also what happens in Washington matters in Massachusetts. But I think this is our promise. We all want to live in a Commonwealth where every family has their best chance at their brightest future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy, for that illuminating report. It's very interesting. I'm looking forward to hearing and now having our discussion about what we can do here in Berkshire County. So as Deb mentioned, my name is Jeff Lowenstein. I'm the board chair for BCAC. And I now want to welcome our Berkshire legislative delegation to the stage to share with us and hear from us about efforts to overcome poverty in the Berkshires. So I'd like to invite up State Senator Adam Hinds, State Representative Tricia Farley-Bouvier, State Representative John Barrett, State Representative Paul Mark to come up to the table. While they're coming up, we're working to get our top 5 Menti priorities up on this screen here. I'd like to call your attention to that, what we have selected as an audience as the top priorities for our county. I'm going to step down. Each of these legislators are going to have 15 minutes to share with us and hear from us about priorities to poverty. I'm going to ask them to take no more than half of that time to share with you what they're working on so that we have a real opportunity to hear questions from the audience. So I'm going to hop down. I'll have a sign. I'll have a microphone. I'll be going around for audience questions. I will say that this mic, unfortunately, is attached to a box that is attached to me. And so I'm going to ask you, if you have a question, please throw up your hand, but try to work your way towards an aisle so that I can bring you a mic. Without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to State Senator Adam Hinds to kick us off.
Okay. So what was the time limitation for each of us? 2 minutes? 2 minutes. 7 minutes. Okay. Okay. Covering all things to address poverty in Berkshire County at the state level as well. Okay. First of all, let me say that that presentation was incredibly useful, because the first thing that I wanted to say up here was that we can talk about the immediate programs and policies that we put in place to address poverty, but if you're not talking about the larger economic picture, you're really missing what's at stake here. And so watching those slides about the disparities in income and wealth gaps through the years by race and by region is really what I think consumes me in my office. We are inheriting this is a bad phrase, an inherently unequal prejudice system for development and community development, right? And so when that's the background, it feels like it's our charge at the state level as policymakers and certainly in local policymakers to dismantle a system of laws and a system of policies that have allowed this situation that we're looking at take place, and then persist. And it continues to persist. And so that's I think, just the starting point that I want to open with, is that we have to be very deliberate in dismantling these laws that have allowed this wealth gap that you've just seen develop and persist. We have to be very deliberate in dismantling the growing income inequality throughout this state. You know, it's easy to throw arrows in Washington, D.C., but right here at home, we're seeing the biggest income gap in the entire nation. Is that right? I don't think I'm overstating that. So what does that mean? I mean, I think we're going to maybe in a minute go into some of the details of policies in the county, whether it's transportation and other things. Is that right? The cliff effect, so we don't need to dwell on that in our opening remarks. But what that means is that, you know, we've also, basically took away all of the ideas I thought for talking, which makes sense when we're talking about the same thing. But, you know, last year was a major year for taking on minimum wage growth, taking on paid family medical leave, and unfortunately another one was taken off the table, which is the millionaires tax and the fair share amendment. And that, I think everyone in this room knows, is essentially saying if you're making over $1 million, the money that you're making over $1 million will be taxed at 4% higher. And there are efforts to reinvigorate that initiative. Essentially, that is one direction that just jumps out as what do you do to make sure that everyone has what they need? And that's when you look at those graphs that show where the wealth is moving, you can see why that is so necessary. One thing that constantly hits me over the head when we're talking about poverty, when we're talking about income inequality, when we're talking about community development, is it's very easy for folks to throw up their hands and say, well, there's no silver bullet. And that is absolutely true. It's true that in some cases, in some communities, in some neighborhoods, in some homes, it might be, education might be the biggest issue. In other homes, mental health might be a big issue. In other homes, transportation might be a big issue. In other homes, down the line, and we're all dealing with each of these. Yet, what strikes me is that the answer, or the question, or the moment of throwing up your hand shouldn't be, there's no silver bullet, therefore, we can never really have an effective policy. Instead, it's saying, are you kidding me? That's exactly why we need to throw everything we can against the wall, and we know it's not a mystery of why we're in this situation. I mean, we just, in a 10-minute presentation, saw a pretty precise prescription of the things needed and the reasons we got here. And so maybe I'll just kind of wind it up by saying, it's an important time to be sitting here with you. We're next Wednesday, our bills are due for the new session, and my own team and everyone up here has been spending the last few months saying, what are we going to do differently this session? What are we going to prioritize? And you can rest assured that on that list is each one of these items that we're talking about. What do we do to address the wealth gap? What do we do, particularly around housing access, and many more. And so this is an incredibly important time to be talking so that we can make sure that we're getting it right, and then to hear from you what you're seeing on the ground and what else we need to be emphasizing. So thanks for all being here.
Thank you, Senator. And I'm now going to turn to the audience and ask everybody to take about 7 minutes here to raise any questions that you have for Senator Hinds about anything he mentioned, anything that you see as priorities for addressing these issues in Berkshire County, or efforts that you're aware of or involved in that you would like to share with Senator Hinds.
We have a consensus on the panel that we'd like to go all the way down the line first. Is that possible?
Yeah, that's totally welcome.
Then we can have a discussion.
All right, please.
Mostly it gets me off the hot seat, so that's good.
Fair enough.
Well, if you grill him, then we'll know what not to say. I mean, so unfortunately for me, but luckily maybe for the people in this room, poverty is very personal to me. So I'll tell people a little bit about some of my story. When I was about 12 years old, we got the word on Christmas Eve, no less, that my father was going to be out of work. He was getting laid off. The job where he worked was closing down, moving out of town. That was it. Good luck, guys. And so it hit us really bad. And for the next 5 years or so, I remember using food stamps, being embarrassed. My mother went up to the counter. I'd try to walk away when we were shopping. I remember our water heater broke once, and we didn't have hot water for 3 months because we couldn't afford to fix it. And I remember having to move a couple of times because we couldn't afford the houses we lived in. And it was very stressful in our family, and it was embarrassing, and there was shame, and there shouldn't be shame. And so we got really lucky at one point, my father, and it was never a matter of him not working. My father still worked, and he worked minimum wage. I remember he worked at a department store, he worked landscaping, he worked overnight as a DJ on the radio. He'd do anything he could to just keep us going. And as you can tell from looking at me, I never went without a meal, but we still struggled for a long time. And then at some point he got a different job, and they had a training program for them at the work that he found, and he was able to be successful for the rest of his life. So some of the things I've been focusing on since I've been in office, just to start on my family story, have been in how do you keep businesses local? How do you prevent these companies that come around and want to move to China or Indonesia or wherever else and just leave everybody here on their own, leave us without, after you've given a career to them, leave them without the things that you need. And I focused on trying to file bills on employee cooperatives, employee stock ownership, ways to keep businesses local. I've tried to support unions. One of the biggest things, one of the biggest differences in my life that helped me become successful and get out of the cycle of poverty was union membership. Supporting workforce training has been a big thing for me. In Franklin County, we were able to start up an advanced manufacturing training program. In Franklin County, one of the poorest counties in the state, they had a problem. There was high unemployment, but they couldn't fill jobs because the people didn't have the skills they need. And so we put in a partnership between the community college, the high school, and local business community to try to prevent that. And so now people are graduating, 6 classes have graduated from this program and getting jobs right in Franklin County. And so the main thing I want to talk about is higher education, because what got me out of poverty and has kept me out of poverty has been higher education. And appropriately enough, we're in a college. And so when I got out of high school, I went to UMass for a year. And I was there, and I realized I can't afford it. I couldn't afford to take on student debt. I couldn't afford to go back to classes themselves, and also I couldn't afford to live. I couldn't burden my parents. I couldn't do the things I needed. I couldn't buy a car. I couldn't do any of the things I wanted to do as a 19-year-old man. And so I left. And I got lucky, and I got a job at the phone company as a lineman. And like I said, I was a union member of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. And they had a really great tuition assistance program. And once I was vested, so 2.5 years in, I remember sitting, and they were talking about a layoff. And I looked around the room, and I saw people in their 30s and their 40s and their 50s, and I said, that's my father, and that's never going to be me, because they were scared. And so I went back to school. And in 8 years, I did an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a law degree, and a doctoral degree. Because they paid for it. Thanks. But I never say that because I want that applause, although I appreciate it. I say that to make the point that 10 years earlier, I couldn't finish a bachelor's degree because I couldn't afford it. And I obviously had the talent and the passion and the drive. I just needed the opportunity. And so one of the big... Thanks. And so one of my focuses has been on student debt and student affordability. Because the punchline to this story also is, once I got out of college with all these degrees without any student debt, I met my lovely wife. And I married into her $750 a month in student debt from her UMass English degree. And she's worth every penny, but it affects every decision we make in our life. It's more than our mortgage. It affects saving for retirement. We don't have kids is one of the reasons we don't have kids yet. It affects everything we are trying to do in our lives. And so just some statistics on student debt. I was able to chair a subcommittee on student loans and debt. And this is some of the stuff we found out. 66% of Massachusetts students have student loans. Massachusetts has the 12th highest debt load of the 50 states, and that's an average of $28,500 per student. And that's probably gone up over $30,000 because the study was 4 years ago. The total US student debt is estimated at over $1.2 trillion, and that's tripled in the last 12 years. It is the second largest form of debt now in the country after mortgages, and it has a high delinquency. Only 39% of people with student loans make on-time payments, and 10% of them are in default. And it's almost impossible to get rid of student debt. You can't declare bankruptcy and get rid of it. And at the same time, not only is it bad for the borrower, it's also bad for the lenders, because if they do default, you can't repossess a degree. There's no way for the bank to get its money back either, so it's a lose-lose. And you're more likely to go into delinquency or default if you don't indeed graduate. People with student loan debt are less likely to buy a home, to get married, to have kids, or to open a business. Graduates with a degree earn 84% more over their lifetime. That's almost $1 million more. So that's the attraction, of course. It is a way out of poverty. And so the recommendations of our subcommittee was increasing financial literacy, making sure people understand what are they signing when they're 18 years old. Can you actually afford it? Yeah, it'd be nice to live in New York City for 5 years and take out all these debt, but is that gonna affect the rest of your life afterwards? Increasing funding. Massachusetts is 48th out of the 50 states for funding of our higher education institutions, if you can believe that. And I couldn't believe it the first time I heard it. We have to increase that funding, but also increase accountability to reduce costs. Increasing and reforming state aid, like the Mass Grant Program and the Adams Scholarship Program that a lot of students are eligible for. Decreasing the time to degree. The longer you're in school, the longer it's going to take you to pay for that school, the more you're going to have to amass debt. So trying to do dual enrollment, different programs like that. Regulating for-profit schools. I'm glad to say we've already taken great strides for that in the last 4 years, thanks to our work and the work of the Attorney General's office. Creating and enhancing savings plans, we've also been doing that over the last 4 years. That's another success. Loan forgiveness programs, people like social workers. What a great, important job. But how do you afford to go into a job that pays you $45,000 a year if you have $70,000 in debt? Crazy. Public-private partnerships, like what I had at Verizon. 1 day a week, they would send me to school. They send me to STIC Springfield Technical Community College during my work time to get an associate's degree. It made me a better worker, it made me more valuable to them, and it got me extra money. It was great. It was a win-win. And then partnering with the feds. Elizabeth Warren and our Congressman Neal and Congressman McGovern have done great work in trying to lower the student interest rate at the federal level. And they face an uphill battle every single day. That all translated into a 34-section bill that I filed a couple of times. Like I said, we've had a couple of successes, we've had some setbacks, and unfortunately everything costs a lot of money, which brings us to the final point I wanted to make, which is revenue. Revenue matters. Now, no one ever is talking about we want to tax and waste it. We're going to stop. We want taxes, but we want taxes for things that matter. My cell phone. If I don't pay the bill, I don't get to use it. Taxes are the same thing. Thank you.
So really building on what Paul has said, let's think about who is it that is in the midst of paying the biggest load of student debt. They're the same people who have young children or are contemplating having children or not, making these really hard decisions about that. The senator says there's no silver bullet to poverty, and I agree with that, but there's something really close. And to me, that's quality early childhood education. If there is a secret sauce to poverty, it is quality early childhood education. We were looking at some graphs earlier, and there was some kind of key dates on those graphs. So let's go back to 1973 when, things were kind of coming together. We were making some progress when it came to poverty. And think about what did family look like in 1973? Well, I can tell you what my family looked like. I'm not saying it was average. I have 9 siblings. My mom was home taking care of those 9 siblings. I'm sure she would much rather have been not home and dealing with the 9 of us, right? My dad was a school principal, making about $15,000, with a PhD, making about $15,000 a year, and raising 10 children. And actually, Nana lived with us, so he was supporting, his mother at the same time. Now families don't have those choices. Actually, in the middle, when my children were young, the big debate was the choice. The women were choosing to stay home or work. Stay home and work. It was a raging debate, and people were shamed one way or the other. If you're a stay-at-home mom, you weren't professional enough. If you didn't stay home with your kids, you weren't a good enough mother. It's not that those pressures aren't on moms anymore, but it's not that much of a choice anymore, is it? Right? Both parents have to work, or the percentage of women head of household, right, has skyrocketed. Our families look very different, but our policies around childcare and early education have not changed, certainly not changed significantly. I'm going to first talk about the workforce. Early childhood educators. They're just babysitters, right? They're just somebody taking care of your kid. So let's pay them at babysitter wages. And that's what's happening. Some of our lowest paid professionals, these are professionals, are early educators. Now I'm going to say this, a lot of that has to do with gender discrimination, because if we look at all professions, those who are dominated by women tend to be lower paid. That's another discussion. But the state, over the last 6 to 8 years, have made significant investments in raising the professional level of our early educators. That's been a significant investment, and we've made great strides in doing that. MCLA has been a terrific partner in that. Berkshire Community College has been a terrific partner in that, along with our school systems. But you know what happens? These, mostly women, cross the stage, get a bachelor's degree, and go make minimum wage or maybe $1 over with a bachelor's degree. Because what kind of value are we putting into taking care of our children? Our children who, at that time, their brains are developing faster than any other time in their lives. Okay? We, as a community, do not put value on that. Secondly, we've got these same young families. They're struggling in student debt, they're struggling with their mortgage payments, or they're not buying homes because they can't do that. And we're asking them to pay for their child care, for early ed. But nobody here has been asked to pay for their 5th graders' education. That's free, because we made a decision as a Commonwealth many years ago that children should be educated and that we as a Commonwealth will pay for that. It wasn't that long ago, 20 years ago, that we decided 5-year-olds should be in school, right? And we need to invest in that. And now it's time to invest in early education, and universal pre-kindergarten should be the policy for every child in this Commonwealth. And by the way, I think we should be starting in our cities that are struggling, like Pittsfield and North Adams. Thanks.
We already do that in North Adams, don't we, Mayor? I have a unique experience, I guess, more than anything else in my career. I got back into this business about 1.5 years ago for a lot of reasons. I think my greatest concern was the economy here in the northern Berkshire area. And it's a very diverse area, but it's one of the lowest income in the state of Massachusetts. I always I've been using the figure of $33,000 as the family income, median family income, and I thought it went up to $38,000. I didn't factor in the children. But poverty has existed so long in the area of North Adams. And it goes back, I placed the blame on it when I taught elementary school for 14 years. I experienced firsthand the poverty in our homes in North Adams. I saw what was going on with the children, the impact that it was having on them, and it was an eye-opener more than anything else. And anybody who's taught in elementary school, that's where you get really closest to the kids at that age. Not that we are better teachers than what you find in the middle or the upper grades, but it's where that you see the connection, you see the impact, where you see child abuse taking place. Being a teacher at a time when they introduced the law that basically said that teachers have to report cases of that, which hadn't been done before, and the difficulty involved in it. Watching at that time that many of the people and the kids that were in my classroom worked at Sprague Electric. And I go back to the Sprague Electric case when, and I'm supposed to be talking about workforce development, which is what it's all about, and I'll get to that point. But Sprague Electric controlled the salaries in North Adams for years. They blocked every new business for coming in to the city in the late 50s and throughout the 60s. Why? So they could control the wages of the employees that were working there. It didn't have the strong unions that they had, in referring to what Paul said, at Pittsfield and GE. So the wages were being controlled within the city. When Sprague, I was there, Mayor, my first month in office, the announcement was made they were moving their corporate headquarters out of the city. Another experience that was an eye-opener. When you have middle-income, middle-aged people coming into my office, husband and wife teams, and saying, what are we going to do? We have our kids are in college, we have a car payment, and there was no available jobs for them to go to at that time. And many of these were the unskilled workers. The skilled workers were successful. They got jobs. At that time, draftsmen were needed at GE and Pittsfield. But the others, the unskilled workers that didn't have it, many of them, over 50% of them, didn't have a high school education at that time. And so we used a program of trying to attract businesses to the community that says we have an available workforce. Well, we had an available workforce, but we didn't have a trained workforce for the jobs that were going to be coming down the road. Most of them, as I said, over 50% didn't have a college education. None of them had computer skills. We couldn't even get them to the point of being literate in the computer area. And that's when we started then with the idea of MASSCAP and developing what was going to change the economy, but we still didn't have that trained workforce. And I'm just going over there superficially because the other area is that through the years with the Workforce Development Program in the state of Massachusetts, I became part of that after leaving the mayor's office, going nearly 3 years in running Berkshire Works, and seeing what they were doing. And most of our people who came in there were unskilled workers that could not get a job. And the biggest need and the lowest paid jobs were those that worked in our nursing homes. Toughest jobs out there, lowest paid, and guess what? They needed it. So all the job training programs were training the CNAs to go into the nursing homes, to work there, and some of the hospital programs that were there. So you say, why did the wages stay low, you know, in here in the northern Berkshire area? Is because of the jobs. There have been no jobs really being created of any magnitude in the northern Berkshires, to a great deal in Berkshire County for a long time now, to replace those jobs that were lost. So now we have stayed in poverty because of that in many areas. And I call poverty, and they talk about minimum wage, I'm talking about a livable wage for our citizens, making sure that our kids get it. And I mentioned about, we had early childhood education at a time in Massachusetts where other communities were charging kids or parents to go into the early childhood education programs at $3,500 a piece. So who's going to get knocked out of it is the lower income kids with the poverty. We still remain today the only county in the state of Massachusetts that has to import people to fill the available jobs that are here. Now, it doesn't take someone, rocket science really to figure out there's a problem here. And how are we going to address it? And when I decided to run a year and a half ago to get back into this business, that was my key point. We had to do something about job training. And we had to do it. I got a small amount of money in the state budget this last time around to hook up a program which is now MassHire, was Berkshire Works, so that we could start training people for the advanced manufacturing jobs that are out there. Our job training programs in the state of Massachusetts in this area are pitiful. And I point it back to the direction of what is taking place with the policies there. We have created issues there that made it even worse than what we have. When you talk about programs, family leave, which we passed this past year for people, who is it going to help? It's going to help those workers that are unskilled, basically. So if they're out of work, they're going to have the ability to at least continue to get a paycheck for a long period of time. I have an experience that happened last year. A fellow worked in the food services operation at MCLA, privately run, and came down with cancer, had to have treatment for 8 weeks, and they said, well, we'll give you a leave of absence for 8 weeks. How does that person survive? It creates another poverty situation. So those are the kind of programs I think that we're trying to do at the state level. But the biggest problem we face here, I believe, in the northern Berkshire area, is making sure that we start training people for their jobs, and I will stop.
Thank you very much. I want to gratefully thank our state legislative delegation for being with us today and also for being so good about sticking with your time. We've preserved about half an hour now for, I think, the most exciting part of this community conversation, which is some real conversation. So we want to take the next half hour to hear from you as the audience and the community here in Northern Berkshire about any questions you have for our state legislative delegation about any of the issues they've mentioned today, any of the issues that we as a community here today have identified as top priorities, any efforts that you're involved with. So please, if you have a question or an experience you'd like to share with the legislators, please throw your hand up. I'll be running around the room. I'm just trying to sneak over into an aisle so that I can reach you with the mic. Questions? Yes.
Hi, this is for all of you because you're part of our state legislation. I was reading yesterday's paper this morning very hurriedly, so I need some explanation. It seems to be some sort of a education bill where they want to change what we already have, and it seems that there's a great fight about it. I would like that explained to me, because as I read it very quickly, because this began at 8, and that's my usual wake-up time. So anyway, I got the impression, and I hope it was wrong, that they were going to take away some of the things that... They said that the original legislation was working to provide equal funding for everybody, and then there were some changes. So help me.
All right, legislators, please.
We'll tag team, but what you're seeing is a very, 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 very good thing. It's basically saying the foundation budget in Massachusetts, which determines the amount that a school or municipality would receive to provide a baseline for what they need, or the amount the state thinks they need to have a basic education for everyone, has been off, and it has been off since the 25 years since this foundation budget was created. There was a commission that gave a report out 3 years ago that essentially said we're paying more at the local level than the state thinks we are on health care, for our retired benefits for our teachers. We're paying more than the state thinks we are for English learners. We're paying more for low-income students. And so this is an attempt to correct that. And so it's trying to get more money into our schools. And so it's long overdue. It'll have a huge impact here locally. It'll have a huge impact across the state. And as Representative Mark said, the debate comes down to the money. If you fully implement it, it could be just shy of about $2 billion by the estimate of the commission. And so we literally went up to the 11th hour in this last term where that became the question, among others. And so what this press conference was this week, and I participated in it, was to say, nope, education is a priority. This is a must-do. The good news is the governor, the speaker, and the Senate president have all said that education will be one of the issues that we tackle early this year. They've also said healthcare costs will be another big issue, relevant, obviously, for all of us to tackle this year. And so, anyway, it's a good thing.
Thank you. Other questions from the audience?
Can I follow up on that in a point
Yes,
that
please.
is important here? Is that it's going to level the playing field for what's going to happen here, to make sure that the kid in North Adams gets the same education as the kid in Wellesley, and making sure that the per pupil costs at one time, and I use North Adams as an example only because I was there was a discrepancy of close to $8,000 to $10,000 between the per pupil expenditures and the state average and what was being spent in the city of North Adams. In 1993, with the Education Reform Bill, that was meant to level the playing field, and it did until 2007. In 2007, they say they didn't change the formula, but they changed how they passed out the money, and they went on a per pupil basis. So since basically 2007, the city of North Adams has lost $3 million in educational funds alone, and then it's been level funded each and every year, just about a couple $100,000 difference maybe on what they're getting, while the other communities continue to grow and can have the ability to raise more taxes. the poorer communities suffered. And I think that hopefully will be rectified with the foundation level budget and the foundation and how it's going to be derived with this new bill. So hopefully it will put every kid in the state of Massachusetts on a level playing field as regards to getting an education.
Thank you.
I'm just going to add that we are all on board in changing and updating the foundation formula and getting real dollars to the communities. None of this will be solved for real until we solve the revenue problem in Massachusetts. And so when there's discussion about revenue in the state, and that you're having those discussions and you're talking about that, around your kitchen tables or with your circle of friends, it's really important for all of you to be ambassadors on this issue, that revenue matters in Massachusetts, and we are not going to be able to address education until we have a better revenue stream.
Thank you to our representatives. I want to open it up for other questions, experiences from the audience.
I just want to ask what we as individuals and members of agencies can do to support the bills that you think are important. And the corollary, how we can reach you about things that we think are important.
What I've actually found is in Berkshire and Franklin County, which is two counties I represent, the best thing you can do is actually talk to people out of our counties, because lucky for all of us, we have great legislators. And so usually, thank you. I've actually found constituents get not frustrated, but almost like, I know it's a waste of my time to call you, Paul, because I know you're already there, but I want you to know blah, blah, blah. It's never a waste of time, first of all, because even if 100 people call me on something I'm already supporting, it's good because I can go tell the speaker or the Ways and Means chair, whoever, 100 people called me about this. This matters. This is why it matters. But I think it's also important that, especially if you're members of networks or community groups or agencies, to contact your counterparts in places where maybe the legislators or even the constituency has a different outlook and needs more education, needs to understand what we are seeing out here in the Berkshires. I mean, that's what we do all the time, is try to make sure our colleagues understand how different it is, even among us. I mean, this morning I was in Peru, so I didn't have the internet, I didn't have cell phone service, and it was snowing. That's why I was the last legislator to get here. And it's important to make sure each other knows that. And then as far as contact, I'll just say specifically for me, I do office hours in 4 of my town halls every single week. So for the Berkshires, if you're in Dalton, come by Tuesdays 9 to 4, we're always there. And all of our contact information for all 4 of us is always on the website.
Now, I'm going to add that there is a new level of activism that has taken hold in this country right now. This is the silver lining in the very dark cloud that we have. And there's great power in that activism. And don't underestimate the difference that you can make by joining forces to raise your voices on issues. People are listening. And government does move very slowly. That's definitely true. There's actually a lot of good reasons for that. But your voices really do matter. And so stay involved on these policy issues.
Yeah, I just like to, because that's
Briefly,
what most of the groups that I talk to, whether it's an issue that's statewide in its worth, but is that I always say Berkshire County legislators are usually on board with most of the issues that are important to the majority, overwhelming majority here in Berkshire County. But reach out to your organizations that you're members of and ask them to say, hey, the rep in Middlesex County or Middlesex or the state senator there is not in favor of it. Maybe you should get them, the organization there, to get on that group that's out there to let them know. Because to be very honest with you, a lot of the groups have not been as vocal as they should have been. And therefore, their message isn't being heard. When I said to the Attorney General about a couple of months ago, she said, talking about the cable issue, this is just an example, And I said, you know, they're hot to trot out here in Berkshire County about what's going on with charter and so on and so forth. She says, geez, I haven't received any calls on it. Now, there's a classic example of an issue that impacts a lot of people. And so you have to use that, using the other towns, communities, districts to get them involved in it with their reps. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Other questions? Yes, over here.
Absolutely. I see that now. Sorry about that. So the current infrastructure here in Berkshire County, as it pertains to transportation, clearly is not working for all the residents that are is it working? For those with low income. Past programs such as the Berkshire Rides program have proven to be successful, especially in North County in the past, but those funds were cut in 2016. That left a tremendous burden on our low-income population here. It filled gaps for employment, it filled gaps for getting to their appointments, and it was a necessary program in North County that now we are still trying to fill those gaps with other community programs. My question is, how do you feel with the current infrastructure that we can make some changes? And my biggest question, and what has been going through many minds, is why are we not allocating money towards the nonprofits for transportation so that they can work on their mission to service the low-income population, be transparent, and ultimately put those profits back into process improvement for the transportation system in Berkshire County?
So this has been a passion of mine, so thank you for raising it. We've been really looking at transportation, east-west rail, north-south rail, and transportation around the county. We have the BRTA here, and they're doing yeoman's work in trying to kind of close those gaps that you're talking about as well, for sure. And I'm glad that they're here to kind of hear this conversation. It's an interesting problem. I mean, the bottom line is we are trying to crack the nut of how do you improve upon rural transportation. So we're very different from most other parts of the state in the sense the square mileage we need to cover and the number of people in that square mile. About 1,000 square miles, basically, Berkshire County. And so the state just increased for the first time in a long time the RTA budget for statewide from 80 to 88 million. And the purpose of that, of that new $8 million was you can apply, and if you're demonstrating innovation. And so, creative ways to get that extra time for people who are working second shift, or creative ways to go into the weekend more, et cetera. There is an effort right now that I think everyone should be aware of, and you're going to hear more about it soon, which is working with the BRTA, working with MCLA. My office tried to convene last summer a design thinking workshop over in North Adams. And the whole purpose was to say, okay, let's think about this differently. Do we have more assets moving around the county that we can mesh with the RTA? Do we have off-duty school buses? Do we have seniors vans? Do we have special needs vans and the rest? BCAC has vans, and all these nonprofits have vans, but they're not communicating. And we're at a point where we do have technology now, putting aside some self-form service in a lot of areas. Which I say very seriously is a major problem. But there are ways to innovate, and so I think that's the next question. We put that system or that effort into the Berkshire Blueprint 2.0, which will be released in February. Thank you, Ben Lamb. And so that will be essentially a pivot to say, okay, we now have a coalition that wants to work on this. I'll end just by saying I've been surprised at how motivated different industries that I wasn't necessarily thinking, how motivated they are, healthcare being the big one. We have a provider in the Commonwealth that said, we lose $300,000 a year to no-shows, and when we probe as why folks are not showing up, it's transportation comes up first. And so there are a lot of folks, we have a big coalition that can really come up with a system that uses the BRTA at its core and then hopefully feeds into that and is an efficient system.
I'm just going to add that really it's going to take all the parties coming to the table. It was interesting, this past year, employers had moved transportation to one of their top concerns, and we hadn't heard that before from them. Interesting, employers never talk about taxes as being their biggest concern, but that transportation, because their employees can't get to work. And so, in other areas of the state, even the Boston metro area, employers are very much part of the transportation. It's a benefit to have a T-Pass if you work at this company or that company. And so if we can get the employers, the government, BRTA, everybody working together on this, I think it will make a difference. But we have to think differently. We cannot think the same way that we did 30 years ago, 5 years ago. Things are different now than they were before. And one of the things that's so different is the opportunity that we have around technology that we didn't have before. So let's take these opportunities and implement them here in Berkshire County.
The thing that really got me, again, going back a year and a half ago, was that, and I known about it before, but didn't realize the impact of it. Of 16% of the sales tax that is paid in this Commonwealth of Massachusetts goes towards the operation of the MBTA. It's over $1 billion a year statewide that comes off of the sales tax. In Berkshire County alone, $31 million goes towards the MBTA. And yet there hasn't been this past year was the first time, I believe, in 3 years that the legislature, and I think it was because of our delegation and some of the others in the rural area, got an increase from $80 million to $88 million statewide. Now, if this Berkshire County and any other county could get 1/10 of that penny, it would raise $3 million maybe, I think, in Berkshire County alone to be focused on correcting our transportation problems here. Now, you have to understand, we're from Berkshire County. We're a foreign country to most of those people down there. And they're good people, but they have their districts too. So it's always difficult. And I think that Tricia touched on something that's very important here. You can't continue to do business as it's been done. And the BRTA is out of sync. And I'll say it because it's the truth. They've got to start doing things differently. Why can't they use their buses to help to bring kids to school? Why can't they do other things by running, contracting out with businesses, possibly, to bring their workers into the shifts and things like that? They've got to start thinking outside of the box. And their first reaction is when there's a cut in funding, what do? We're going to cut services. Well, that's been going on for too long now. And that's where we have to see significant changes taking place. One thing the legislature put in there was that they have to do a performance. Every BRT in the state of Massachusetts has to do this now, is do a performance to show what they're going to use this extra money for and how they're going to go about doing it. That's a good step in the first direction, but there certainly has to be change in the operation of our BRTAs, our BRTA and other RTAs around the state.
So I do want to move us along just to make sure we can touch on some of the other important topics. So other questions? Yes.
I have a question. I'm not sure you can get the mic to me, but I have a big booming voice. A lot of wonderful things have happened in North Adams and Pittsfield and in our community this past year, and I'd like to move the conversation forward. Adam, you mentioned bills are due shortly, and we just had a terrific election, lots of positive momentum. Can you share what you think 2019 and 2020 are going to look like and what people in this room should be kind of ready for to support and engage in?
Yeah, in terms of the agenda itself, and yeah. Well, I just mentioned two of the big ones, and so healthcare financing is a huge part of our budget. It's a huge impact on our towns, on our businesses, on our schools, on each of us as individuals. And there was an effort. It got through one chamber last year, and then there were challenges with the death, unfortunately, of the chairman of the healthcare financing in the middle of that process last term. But again, that trifecta that I keep talking about, the Senate President, the Speaker, and the Governor have all said that healthcare financing and costs will be a priority. I think, so that's key. And education, I mentioned another, and I mean, we did criminal justice reform this past term. There's a real need to make sure, A, it's implemented in full, and B, we're picking up pieces that were left off the table. I think I need to mention that in the top three. What I will say is that, and I didn't add to the previous question about what we can do, you just put your finger on the first deadline, which is filing the legislation. The challenge, of course, is that there's 5,000, 6,000 bills filed, and then they move out to committees, and we'll have committee assignments probably in February. And then there are going to be these milestones that we really need your help on, right? So the first one is all of those key pieces of legislation that we want to see. Once there's a hearing, we want all of your help to say, okay, either file a testimony, come and testify, letters to the editor, all those things to bring visibility to the key issues so that they're not drowned out in that list of 6,000 bills that are filed every year. And then they'll move from that hearing stage to, okay, now they have to come out of committee. We're going to need your help to get them out of committee. So there are strategic points for intervention. Getting them to the floor once they've come out of committee is another key point. Once they're coming to the floor, making sure there's a solid vote. And so, it's not just being loud for the next 2 years, it's being loud when it matters. And so I think that's where the communication with us on what matters to you, and we can track and send updates to each of you as well.
And something I want to mention, because it was in the presentation beforehand, and it's not the most glamorous thing in the world, but it's actually the census. And so I've been the chair of the Committee on Redistricting for the past 2 years, and the census is going to happen in 2020, and the census day is actually April 1st. And the census affects hundreds of programs, both federal and state, that are based on per capita numbers. And so it is insanely important that we make sure that we get out there and we make sure our neighbors fill out their census, we fill out their census, that everybody participates, as many people as possible. When we look at just beyond the per capita numbers that affect programs, we look at democracy itself, democracy itself and our voice in Boston. And the way we have had either stagnant population growth, population decline, and the eastern part of the state having significant population increasing means the five of us and our members of Congress are kind of in trouble. I'm predicting, we've been doing predictions of the numbers for the census. 40,000 people are going to be needed in Congressional District 1. So Congressman Neal already covers a gigantic area. It's going to get bigger. Senator Hinds covers a gigantic area. It's going to get bigger. And again, that affects our ability to be present in front of people, to access us, because if I go from having 16 towns, I used to have 22 towns, I end up with 30 towns, that means I have that many more people that I have to make appearances with and get in touch with. And again, it affects our voice down in Boston and in Washington. So please fill out your census and encourage others to do so.
I want to move us along. Other questions? Yes.
First of all, Adam, I do agree that there's no silver bullet with all the issues you're dealing with. But, as far as early childhood education, career readiness, workforce development, student debt, and strategies for other things, I agree 100%. One thing you haven't touched upon is the fact that we have, by 2030, we will have 60% of our population will be senior citizens. They're not just draining our society, they are coming in and they are spending. They are providing economic boost, but there are many folks that are isolated in poverty. What strategies do you have to meet the challenges that are going to come to us in the next 15 years?
So when we talk about seniors, a previous mindset that we talked about seniors and supporting seniors in poverty. And the Massachusetts legislature, I think, does that extremely well. We are always on board when it comes to, for example, senior nutrition programs, council on aging, and trying to get those funding levels up and respond to seniors in poverty. But I think, Vin, you make an excellent point in that there's a great opportunity when it comes to senior citizens, and Berkshire County is particularly positioned to take advantage of that, in that this is a great place to retire. And I actually am delighted to talk to people who move here and I ask, what brought you here to Berkshire County? Why did you choose Pittsfield? And the answers I get are great. It's affordable. I have as much culture as I possibly could need. I've heard things like there's a great faith community here that I want to be a part of. And so if we can embrace the age-friendly community models, then we have an opportunity to bring, to increase our population in that way, to increase it with people who really want to be community-minded and be active in our community, and quite frankly, people who are in a position to spend some money. And so I agree with you, Vin, that we really need to take a look at what we can do, what policies need to be in place, what projects that we can take on, more, for example, in Pittsfield, Salisbury Estates is, it's a great little community of middle-class seniors, can we have more of that? What policies do we need in place to allow for the village concept? So I'm with you, Vin.
And the policies of the past are what have created for seniors that have not been able to develop a portfolio that's going to support them. That's I think the biggest challenge that I have in the state.
Well, as the only one on this panel that can qualify as a senior, let me say this about that. That what we're facing now is Washington in the state of Massachusetts. I'm sure some of the others on the panel have signed on to a letter asking the governor to come up with the $30 million they lost in fuel assistance in the state of Massachusetts. The overwhelming majority of that really goes to seniors. The late Silvio Conti had a great term. He always says, when seniors have to choose between heating and eating, we got a problem. And I think it's the same thing now, only it's medication. And I've seen a lot of our seniors not take medication so that they can pay for their oil bill or what have you, and that creates some problems. But I think our biggest challenge throughout the country is the devastation that's taking place in funding sources coming from Washington, and the states have, I guess that's the trickle down. And then eventually, it goes from the federal government. When I was a mayor, you say it goes to the federal government, then it goes to state, and then it ends up in the mayor's desk or the local official's desk to deal with the problem. And I think we see more and more of that all the time. So we have to face that reality in hopes things will change in the nation's capital, because right now we are now a country that basically is dealing with how can we best help those in the highest 1% in this country?
I think we have time for one more question in this section. And maybe someone over on this side of the room. No? Okay, we'll head back over there. Someone's trying to tell me how to get across the room here.
I'm Jeff Peck, Tenancy Preservation Program out of Berkshire County. I'd like to know what is being done to assist towns and cities to help their homeless population in the form of something that doesn't have a wait list attached to it.
So I'll take this because Greenfield, which I represent, had a problem where we had people actually living on the common in tents over the summer. And so it was a very real problem. It was almost a demonstration. It started as a demonstration to show people that just because homelessness isn't in front of you doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And it exists even here in small towns. And unfortunately, then more and more people came, and it turned into a public health issue, and it had to be broken up. And so in the past session, one of the things we did as a legislature was we passed $1.8 billion in a housing bond bill that is going to go $1 billion of that directly to affordable housing, to creating new housing and renovating housing that already exists and making it available throughout the entire state of Massachusetts. The other $0.8 billion of that is directed towards programming and new ideas to try to keep. The most important thing you can do is keep someone in their home. When they're getting into trouble, is to make sure they have the assistance at that point before they are out of the house. And again, like I was saying earlier, we lived this. I remember being foreclosed upon at least 2 times and moving. And I don't know how my parents found a way to buy more houses, but they did. And people at that time would give you a loan somehow, even though you worked at Kmart full-time. So trying to get funding, we've put hundreds of millions of dollars over the last 2 years into tenant assistance programs and RAFT and different programs that are designed to keep people in their homes when times are tough and avoid ending up out of your house. Because once you're out of your house, now you're talking about maybe having to leave where your employment is if you're employed, or if you're looking for new employment, you're not really going to be able to find a house when you don't have a job when you don't have an address to provide to the potential employers. So there's been a lot done and a lot of money dedicated towards this, but obviously, as the only right to shelter state in the country, we have some unique issues that other states don't have to deal with.
I'll just add real quickly, and then of course there are a range of other programs, Berkshire Housing Authority and others, that make sure your people are staying in their homes and mediating. I was the lead on a mediation line item that essentially was saying we need mediators to help between an individual being forced out of their home and the courts, and how do you maintain, get them through a rough patch or otherwise. And so there are a range of other programs that are out there as well.
Thank you. I want to bring us to a close here because we need to take a quick break before we bring up our local legislative delegation, or our local elected officials. But I want to thank our state legislative delegation for being with us this morning, for sharing on their priorities.